I watched the recent Senate hearing in the United States of America of Dr. Anthony Fauci talking to a committee. Let me actually check what the committee's name was. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. When I say it like that, does it sound more important? Does it sound like it's some big grand thing that we should be wowed about? I don't know. What do you think? Of course, depending on the party that's in, depending on who's chairing it, right now, Dr. Rand Paul is chairing it. And this is one thing I'll mention right now. Dr. Anthony Fauci is a regular thing mentioned. But how often do they also say Dr. Rand Paul? If we're talking about the experts here, wouldn't someone like Rand Paul, who's been a practicing physician, been able to question him, the expert, the science TM in Dr. Anthony Fauci? But this is something that you might notice as well when you're listening to certain coverage. How often do people say Dr. Anthony Fauci and make sure to include that, but say Rand Paul? I guess sometimes they say Senator Paul because right now I guess his senatorial position is somewhat higher than his doctor position. But then why don't they say bureaucrat Anthony Fauci when Dr. Anthony Fauci himself was never actually a practicing doctor in that sense, never had patients and things like that. But no, 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 no. That kind of thing already exists in your mind right now. As I've mentioned it, you might have noticed it before. You will notice it forward. Getting into what this is going to be about, I'm going to be discussing just my thoughts from this, my almost zero expectations of this actually leading to any legal actual consequence for Anthony Fauci, and then deciding to actually check in and watch this thing live, this political theater that was going on live. It was a slight delay so I could have it in 2 times speed, but still just watch it. I wasn't surprised by what Anthony Fauci decided to do, pleading the fifth a total of 111 times. I wasn't surprised at the impotence shown by the Republicans who were going in there and just yelling at him, making these speeches, political theater. It's political theater. I'm a political junkie. I understand some of these things. I am realistic about what the state is. I wasn't surprised that the Democrats who showed up this time were just filleting Fauci because he was such an important figure to them in their political identity story of the last couple of of the last decade or so, even further than that. He's a consummate bureaucrat, so I didn't expect him to be held accountable by the system as he's lived off of the system. He's a creature of the system. He is the consummate swamp creature of sorts. He's Swamp Creature '01. Like, he's like the basics of it. That's who he is. He rose to the top of it. He's been in there for that long, so I wasn't surprised about that. But I was still kind of shocked. Just the blatant, like, just how blatant and just, he's just like, yeah, I don't care. I saw some people saying that, oh, you can see Fauci was bothered sometimes. He was shaking and he was worried that he was in danger. And I think on the contrary, that wasn't it at all. I think there's this thing in Kenya, they say, like in Swahili, utadu. It's just like, oh, what are you going to do? What you going to do about it? Like, utadu. And I think that's how he was in that situation. He was kind of just shaking, like annoyed. Said, how dare you put me out here? I am Dr. Anthony Fauci. I am the science. I have been a loyal member of the state. How dare you try to use the state against me when that's been my main tool? I have lived with it. I've grown with it. I've thrived in it. I've grown the state. I have been doing the bidding of the state. I've been carrying out the functions of the state. The state is what it is today because of people like me, not like you senators out there, not like you people, you peons out there saying like, oh, something should be done to me. I don't think he even really cares about the adulation in that kind of sense. It's just like, I think he was, it seemed like, again, this might be me projecting on him, but I think he was just more consternated to be up there. But that's me. That's my point of view. I might be projecting here. I might be biased towards certain things, but perception does matter. And this, as you can see on the screen, if you're watching the video version of this, it's going to have 2 different versions of Fauci because there's at least 2 major camps of how they look at who Dr. Anthony Fauci was, is, and will be remembered in the future. And that's kind of what I'm covering here. I think with some of these series that I'm doing, Perception Matters is just about how people react to X rather than what the X actually is. And I think that's where most of the problems in the world exist. And then the designs are also in the Anyone But Che series, which was a series about people who wear Che Guevara without actually understanding who the man was. And then some people do understand he did all these vicious things, but because of his policy or his politics or certain views, they don't care about the negative things that the person did. So they still wear it. But many people who have a reaction to it are just like, oh, it's just aesthetically pleasing. It seems to fit. I kind of like the design. So with that one, I decided to do many other people in the series. And I've been wondering, I was thinking, okay, there's more fitting people to be there than Che Guevara. But now with Fauci, for some people, they think he's done a lot more positive things than Che Guevara. But for some people, it's a lot more negative things than Che Guevara. So I'm going to have the two different versions of this. And I'm also doing a Made America series where I pick people, projects, and places from the 250 years of the United States of America and see what made America what it is today. And as I said, there's a key part of America. It's a political entity. And Anthony Fauci has been a key part of that, more behind the scenes than he was in the last decade or so. So I think he also fits into that. So many things coming together with that. It's been a long intro. To do this, I'm going to be reading from a recent 24 to 48 hours later I have on my Rantathon blog, so you can check out. There's going to be a lot more things in there. And in particular, an article that I wrote way back in 2020 called The Gospels of Faucism, Fraud, Faustian, or Fallible. That was another Perception Matters from back then. So I'll be reading that here and putting those things together and then giving some thoughts towards the end. Okay. I'll start with the recent 24 to 48 hours later, because as you'll see with the reading and explaining what's going on, there's a part in there that I kick to this older article. Then I'll read the older article then. But for now, this was, are the fraudsters for Fauci worse than Fauci? And with this one, I started this off with 10 clips. These 10 clips on Next Up with Mark Halperin. And Mark Halperin used to be on more mainstream media, and then he's kind of went independent. He's been doing this show Next Up and Two Way, where he has a everyday thing. Maybe on the weekend they're not performing, but he has these two different shows where he has people call in, and he's giving a different take on certain things, but he's still a statist at heart. But I like the way he has this platform that people call in and talk about different things, and he's able to cover things that are not necessarily mainstream media narrative approved. And he was consternated about why people were not actually following this. And to this end, he decided to have these 10 clips of just people, the media bias that they had with the Fauci hearing coverage. This was after it was out. They're just saying, this is ridiculous. I can't believe people are treating you this way, Fauci. Like, how are they doing this to this innocent man? This is a witch hunt. This is Ron Rand Paul doing these things. So you can check out that clip there. And in my blog post, I highlighted a top comment from that clip video that was focusing on something important with the coverage that I was seeing. This is how it went. The downplaying of the diary is so disgustingly dishonest. The key point of the diary is the specific admissions within it, not the entirety of the diary itself. Anyone with investigative experience and a modicum of honesty knows this to be true. For instance, during homicide investigations involving a diary as evidence, law enforcement will read pages involving events and details that are unimportant to the case until they reach the page or pages where the confession or admission to the crime is at. Sorry. So yeah, and it's disgusting, but they moved on from admissibility of the diary. The coverage moved on relatively early. The sort of regressive Fauciists that I don't know, sometimes they do these days, but there's something about this that really constantly like the name calling and making up things. So the sort of discussing Fauciists tried to say that the diary was some sort of violation of piracy. But remember, they don't care. Even if it was someone's most private documents kept in a private home, in a locker, in a room that had a lock shaped like the coronavirus depiction whose key Fauci wore on a chain around his neck. If that was the case, they wouldn't care. Key is, does X information reinforce or undermine the narrative they prefer that supports their continued maintenance and acquisition of social, economic, and political power? That's how you have to treat these statists. That's how I see some of these people. And I don't get what some people were surprised about the reaction, but this is why I'm not surprised. Still a bit shocked by some of the things they do, but not surprised because this is my lens that I view some of these things at. Okay, so continuing. And even that sort of genuine privacy claim was found to be unfounded when it was made clear that the diary was actually official document records, government documents. So on official government servers, still in government possession, and subject to release via things like the Freedom of Information Act applications. So no need to organize an FBI raid and pilfer through the wardrobes of Fauci's wife And when it comes to the mainstream media employees and consumers who rely heavily on the releases of state documentation, they would be undermining their own raison d'etre for focusing on that. So instead, they switch to the content in said diary. Because just think about it in that kind of sense. This is what they do. Oh, anonymous sources said this. Anonymous sources said that. Oh, we talked to somebody who's familiar with Trump or familiar with the administration, familiar with this. And that's how they get most of their information. They don't actually go and do investigative reporting anymore. So if they said, oh, it's wrong for government documents to be released to the people, what would they be discussing? What would they be consuming? Continue. Next. If you found yourself in a position to believe what you were being told by the MSM and other people that you trusted back in 2020 and during the pandemic, or you at least thought you had to make the decision that even though you did not trust what these folk were telling you, that they weren't telling you the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, you were certain that if you did not comply with their mandates and other declarations, you would not be able to accomplish important things and provide for yourself and your loved ones, it is nothing to be ashamed of. I understand that most people were not terminally online hermits living in poverty with no real financial or social responsibilities to people that they loved and cared for, so could not have the option of tracking this thing from the Wuhan Games back in 2019 around there to other uttering that was then reversed or brushed under the rug 2 or so weeks later when it was behind the curving road of the narrative like I did. Most of you were not the sort of political junkie already disillusioned at the mainstream media and the political actors that they were the audiovisual department of. Many of you had not cultivated a select group of friends and associates who would not, through whatever circumstances, feel the need to peer pressure you into following what the experts were saying we had to do to save the neighbor's grandma from the spreading blight. So even though many of you may have thought one thing about COVID and still behaved in a different way during the pandemic, you're not like Fauci and the other Fauciists who knowingly used their positions of power and privilege to profit from what went on during the pandemic. Now, this was me back in 2021, so I'm going to read from The Gospels of Fauciism, Fraud, Faustian, or Fallible. And this is posted, as I said, June 2021. From as early as February 2020, I stated a primary utility of what turned out to be this COVID pandemic is how it will serve as a Rosetta Stone of sorts to the way humans approach reality. It has not disappointed in that capacity. Currently, after a Freedom of Information request, thousands of emails of Dr. Fauci have been made public. Marca First Amendment. As the content of the emails begins to be picked up by the various news sources and through other means seeps into the general infospheres we are part of, there are a fantastic example of how diversely people experience life from our reality tunnels. Of the interested parties, there are some 2 vocal sides being taken. On one side, there is the I told you so faction that points out this is the continued figurative dragging of the corpse of any credibility Dr. Fauci ever had. Let's call this the Keep Fauci Away team. Then the other, I would invite Fauci into my house side. They think it's some sort of glorious wakeboarding down the highway of sociopolitical Valhalla after having spent the pandemic saving us poor masses from drowning and being eaten up by the bad orange sharks' nefarious intentions. Keep in mind that most concern, and especially the level of fear that people had during the pandemic, was literally not due to the actual virus. I confidently say this because there was and still is little to no empirical evidence of its origin, nature, future, and other significant risk factors that remain consistent or even correct since it first appeared. I will say that despite what I may think about the content of these emails, subject matter being discussed, or specific parties corresponding, a society that would contain the ability to release this sort of content, redacted and spun as it may be, of high-level public officials is preferential to the one like the Chinese Communist Party with its deep levels of conformity and secrecy. Here's what the Washington Post and BuzzFeed have made accessible. So here I had a post from a Twitter account of Jason Leopold. I don't think that post is still existing. So that's something I need to do also with this different blog post. Go back in some of our blog posts and take pictures of things and put them up, or should I put the text on it somehow, or done archives? I don't know. I checked one site to do this deleted Twitter finder thing. If you have any suggestions of good places to find it, I didn't find it there, and it's not that important. So I'll just get back to the reading. Dr. Fauci himself has admitted that he changed information due to polling, when he spoke of what percentages would be needed for herd immunity. Explained that he said things he did not believe to be certain to try and save personal protective equipment, PPE, for those who he deemed needed it more. He has long been known to be in favor of gain-of-function research. He and many others in his field and international power broker level have pointed out how there are regular chances to have pandemics, which covers his 2017-ish assurance that Trump, like pretty much all recent US presidents, would most likely have to face a pandemic during his term. This last one and other examples could be argued that he and others decided the general public would not be able to understand things in a preferential way. The pandemic is ending. Deaths related to and from infection are on the decline, down to zero in some previous places referred to as hotspots. Vaccines have been taken in levels previously unheard of in this short of a time. The information about what happened is only increasing. Books are being written, content being compiled, links being made. Even if it was not occurring during the typically chaotic and hyper-focused US presidential election year season that did not include the supposed existential threat from former President Trump, there were many practical effects and concerns that most people who care about this information were occupied with in the midst of the pandemic. Now that time and mental space is opening up, there is soon to be an infodemic of sorts that can no longer be contained. Release the pandemic. Some conspiracy theorizing now. Unlike the best podcast in the world, No Agenda, and a little aside, I was listening to No Agenda back then, and that's been a show value for value system. I'm going to adopt value for value, the stuff that I'm doing. But John C. Dvorak, RIP, he just passed away recently, and Adam Curry, they were covering a lot of these stories. There's other people, like I said earlier on, I have selected the information I get. I have the time and mindset and desire to get information outside of normal mainstream narrative sources. And No Agenda was one of the places where people were very thankful to the No Agenda show and places like that were spreading this information in good ways. So just wanted to mention that. RIP John C. Dvorak. He was a good guy. He helped a lot of people. I got on No Agenda for at least the last 6 or 7 years I've been listening to it. But anyway. So back to the reading. Unlike the best podcast in the world, No Agenda, from which I borrowed the term conspiracy therapist that was first heard from Adam Curry, there are certain some agendas to consider in these ongoing releases. Sure, the Washington Post and BuzzFeed could just be looking into this for the sake of the masses. WAPO editing posts about debunking conspiracy theory lab leaks, and BuzzFeed with its P-dossier reporting could be genuinely providing examples to someone keep Fauci away from me team or invite Fauci into my house to support some of their claims. Could be a simple happenstance of actual typical non-special interest driven reporting. They could just think, hey, we need a new story content and COVID looks like it would be winding down, so let's try to end it on a high. However, check this clip from the first interview Fauci gives after the release of the emails that he had some heads up on. This, after all, was a Freedom of Information Act request that went through the bureaucracy that Fauci is the highest paid employee of. And this is now from Tom Elliott. We'll splice this in here. From MSNBC's Nicole Wallace scores the first interview with Fauci since his emails were made public and uses it to say,
well, the true mark of someone is if they look good, even when their personal emails come out. So you pass the test that very few of us would pass.
Another aside here. You see, here they were talking about personal emails coming out. They weren't like, oh, it's horrible that you're reading through his personal emails. How dare you? But now, like, the diary is supposed to be some sort of violation. And how come they're not saying this anymore? Are they saying he still looks good, even though his personal diary came out? Come on. Okay, that's not happening. Back to the reading. Someone pointed out that being the shrewd political creature Fauci is, he knew to go to Nicole Wallace as a partisan former White House press secretary to get the desired sort of handling of this story. This got me to thinking as I drafted this of why this request would have come from WAPO and BuzzFeed. The top brass, reporters, editors, and others in control, with or without coordination from state sources, could have thought this release would vindicate their demographics' nigh worship of this man. This information was going to come out anyway. Better to get out in front of the wave. If you can't control it, you may as well ride it to a more desirable location. Is it working? And then now another Tom Elliott video. And Tom Elliott is just doing an amazing job of making sure the internet never forgets by just having these clips. And he has, I think Grabian is a site and project that he put together that just keeps clips together of different things that have happened in the media. And you can just go back and like, okay, you said this in the past. And some of these things could be controlled in the past where they just be like, okay, I never said that. Where's the evidence of that? But now you have all this tracking. So this was Fauci on one of his emails admitting masks are useless against COVID. I don't know if I can do a Fauci. You accumulate a lot of information and you modify and adjust your opinion and your recommendation based on the current science and current data. Fauci on his redacted email about his a possible China lab leak. The idea, I think, is quite far-fetched that the Chinese deliberately engineered something so that they could kill themselves as well as other people. I think that's a bit far out, John. Yeah, it turns out this was the case. It wasn't just the Chinese. From what's coming out right now, it was more than just the Chinese to get this thing going. Now is it? Okay. So back to the reading. Tiananmen Square, great leap forward, one-child policy aside. Sure, at least 3 people have outright said that the CCP manufactured this with the intention to kill folk. I can even come up with a kinda sorta interesting premise for a story about how this was concocted to target the elderly and obese in a way similar to previously identified conditions to lessen the burden on social services that they will surely have. But that's a fictional idea in general. Fauci is erecting a straw man. So what's really going on here? Less than 1% of those that form strong opinions based on these emails will do so based on direct quotes from it, whether it's in context or not. Likely less than 0.001% of people that will actually read more than what's actually contained in the primary stories and posts about them. One more interesting possibility is that the current powers that be are continuing to pivot away from COVID by tying certain soon-to-be considered less than glorious things to the primary figures of the pandemic so that they can come out to build back a better new plus normal in a greater reset social-political climate. And here I posted a status about how Cuomo, Bill Gates, and Fauci at that time, these were COVID heroes and they were being taken down. So I'm wondering who else was going to get hemmed up at this. So at that time, Andrew Cuomo is still governor of New York and will most likely serve his entire term. That didn't happen. He resigned about 2 months after I posted this. Bill Gates is still one of the most wealthy humans in the world. He seems to have been and still have some personal traits that I kind of find disgusting. We shall hear more about this as it unfolds. As for major ramifications, I'd say that Ghislaine Maxwell may not be long for the world. Shortly after that possible totes and unfortunate suicide, I imagine Gates shall transition into funding climate change and other socio-politically accepted globalist plans from more of a behind-the-scenes point of view, while Melinda, unsure what her name will be, but I can't imagine her keeping it. Let me actually check if she kept the name. Yeah, she did keep it. I remember actually posting about this on Rantathon. And yeah, she's shrewd enough of a person to realize there is cachet in the Gates name, so she added French ahead of it, so it's Melissa French Gates now. But yeah, she kept it because he's not that evil. I mean, he can still do a lot of good with that name, right? Okay, so you'll take over the spokesperson role of the Gates Foundation. I thought that's what Melinda would do, and that's what she's doing. She's still kind of heading that kind of stuff. The media can laud her more lavishly as it's not considered gauche to praise wealthy females, to praise the wealth of females. Focusing on how a white male may have rightfully earned billions of dollars, not narrative friendly. Saying a female did by just having to deal with said male, unscripted. As for Fauci, why did some outlets delist his book? It likely will still sell, but regardless, he got the advances for this book already. That's how some of these things. And also, just on an aside, check into the book publishing industry and the kind of monetary shenanigans that goes on with that thing. It's kind of wild. I think it's a lot more common knowledge now, but yeah, it's still kind of interesting just to look into. Okay, back to the reading. If this turns out to be a rather certain admission that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology Laboratory, same lab that Fauci and others have been involved with, that multiple countries funded, that it was known by several that were quiet and some that actively denied the facts and willingly participated in covering it up, then do one or all of the vaccines not even make it out of the FDA emergency use exceptions? How long until they just try to spin this into Trump and Operation Warp Speed for creating an environment where people could not be honest and then rushing out a vaccine to cover his failures? And again, this is just a bit of a side thing here. Like, Trump is still on that. He's still touting Warp Speed. And I think there's something about his mentality where he just can't say that he was duped. If he says, like, okay, these people kind of fooled me for other political reasons, I didn't want to, like, go against this, it was a political calculation, I was kind of off on that. I think he's a sort of mentality that always wants to just advance, like, always wants to be going forward. Never wants to be shown to have had some weakness. Oh, this person got one over me. Never, never, never something he can do. And I think he's just tied in on that. And that's a weird thing. And also in the inverse, the people are kind of on side. You know, some of the people who are never Trumpers, who have some Trump derangement syndrome in that kind of sense, they're kind of in a situation where you find them being like, but even Trump supports this. You know, it feels like it kind of gives them a bit of an ick to say that, because they're saying like, oh, you're on Trump's side on this one? So like, why could you people who worship Trump just follow what Trump says? Stop questioning Fauci. Okay, back to the reading. With Cuomo, Gates, Fauci, and others holding the bag of their failures, the old faces and folk in charge of the new administration can then roll out their new vaccines and procedures founded on the great investigative work that was done under the leadership of Biden instead of that evil orange man. Some fires will continue to rage completely outside of our control. When they do, you may as well break out the marshmallows and have some s'mores. Now on to the memes. I'll post some memes on the screen. I had a few memes on the post, but now getting back to reading the 24 to 48 hours later post that I had here. So on this blog, I've been posting so much and I don't share this stuff. I don't worry about SEO. I tried searching even just like the actual copy and paste of the title on Google, Brave, and other browsers. Wasn't able to find this stuff. And some of this stuff did have the means of being shadow banned, blocked, things like that. But it could just be my SEO, lack of SEO engagement and things like that. But there was actual censorship. I don't think my little tiny channel or whatnot was valuable enough to get knocked down. But I'm trying to do better. So if you're actually enjoying some of this stuff so far, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll be doing a lot more. We're reading a lot more of the older stuff when I'm back in. But yeah, so back to this. I was just some guy in Nairobi, Kenya, with an obsession with geopolitics, specifically I'm like a fanatic, especially the political theater of the American sort. That's kind of my sphere. That's kind of my jam. That's kind of what I was focused on. So that's kind of what I was focusing on during that time. And it was a massive time. So again, if I had some of the lives and considerations that most of you hearing this did, I may have complied. I recall considering getting the Johnson & Johnson shot in case I got the opportunity to travel outside of Kenya to a place that required the proof of vax. And that was in the past, though. Like, I see the statist aggressives in that clip by Mark Halperin showing the media just reacting to this thing, just being appalled, affronted. There was this meme I also saw of this little girl on this like memes are site where she's feeding some dogs some water, and she's like, sticky, but she's meaning stinky. She's like, stinky, and then the dog licks her in the face. And I've never seen a toddler that affronted in my life, and that's kind of what I'm seeing. So how dare you? So you're seeing that kind of thing, and so I see them also kind of admitting indirectly that they too know that the state can be used to incarcerate individuals for things that they claim said individuals are not guilty of having done, and that state officials can and do use their own agenda to trump up charges in unjust ways. Now I'll just go over some of the things that I posted in this 24 to 48 hours later. And as I said, with this series, 24 to 48 hours later is a sub-series on my Rantathon blog where I just do things. I normally wait. I think in many cases, people want to react and discuss things they feel are very urgent. But in my experience from having done that in the past, normally if you just wait at least 24 to 48 hours for more information about that particular X to come out, your initial reactions and the initial things you said are found to be fallacious or false or not correct. So you can just wait a bit. Very few things need you to react and say something about immediately if you're not being directly affected by it. So that's kind of my thought with this series. And so a bit of some things that are in there. So I'll begin with a copy and paste of my Come See This Thing blog post, which is a series where I get 3 different stories and I connect them together. So with this one, it started off with just something I had posted in the past. I have a lot of videos of this guy, at least like 30 different videos covering it, and probably more than that, way more than 30. But you can check out Dying Alive. You can just search for that time span and things like that, or the Rantathon blog. And the first one was a Wuhan flu ain't nothing to Africa. And that was just talking about the different figures that were in there. One of the things, the numbers that people keep mentioning, I hear people say like, "Oh, this country had this country had that." Don't mention those figures. I remember like a year into the Wuhan flu, the pandemic, China was reporting that it had fewer deaths from COVID than Kenya did. And both those, Kenya and China, had fewer deaths than like mid-sized US states like Indiana. I'm like, this is not right. First of all, what people are attributing as deaths was not across the board. Even if they were across the board, the level of testing was not sufficient. The genetics of the people, the demographics of the people. So it was kind of pointless to keep quoting these numbers, whether you're quoting it in support of Fauci and the pandemic and the narrative and what was going on, or criticizing it. The numbers, just throw those numbers out. They're not reliable. I don't use them. It makes me sus of you if you're bringing those numbers up. Okay. So I just posted with Senator Rand Paul. He had this thread of Tony's diary and things like that. So the different things that were mentioned in there. Then I posted After Party with Emily Jashinsky, who's someone I really like listening to her political commentary on different things. She used to be on Rising, then she's now on Breaking Points a bit, and now she has her own thing on After Party and does a lot of other things. Really like the coverage she had. So she had Mary Margaret Olohan, is a Irish-ass name, or is it Scottish? I don't know. But she had him on. They was talking about different things like Mitch McConnell and talking about the Fauci diaries, of course. And then, of course, I had the Forbes hearing. So the full hearing, if you want to watch it yourself, as I said, you can skip through it to see what the actual senators and people say, because Fauci just repeats over and over again, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth. But the title of this one, with Forbes Breaking News, was Full Hearing, Dr. Anthony Fauci faces off against lawmakers in Senate, Homeland, and ensuring whatever. But faces off, like I guess there was potential for a face-off, but I went in with no expectations. But is this a face-off by him just saying nothing? Is there an actual face-off in there? Or maybe they actually put that earlier. But this is the result that I saw. I think the part that really disgusted me the most about this, it's Fauci is the consummate bureaucrat. He is the result of the welfare state hand in hand with the warfare state in causing death and destruction for both domestic and foreign peoples. It's not as clear to see for some as bombs over Baghdad or Bosnia were, and currently over Beirut and Belgorod are. But if Bush, Bibi, Baba, Biden, and others are responsible for militarism in their policy when they're in charge of the welfare state, then Fauci certainly may have been responsible for arguably more harm through his initiation of this global anthropomorphic catastrophe that was COVID-19. Whatever you want to say. Another thing with the figures, how come the flu disappeared for that time? If the flu was so dangerous and killing that many people, should we do all those things again in order to save people from dying from the flu? Very few people want to do that, but why were people on board with that, with this novel COVID virus? If the novel COVID virus is so dangerous to be worried about, why was it not also accurate to be worried about a novel COVID virus vaccine? Like, it's just so many things, just people's minds kind of just short-circuited. But as I said, this is a Rosetta Stone for culture. For people who are obsessed with people watching sociology like I am, I'm like, yeah, we can look at how this was being done in Kenya, how this was being done in different other places. Like, I remember recently going to the National Museum and walking around there, and still places in Kenya, you still see these marks of the foot, how far you're supposed to be on, the signs of COVID, wear your mask. Whereas in the United States of America, I think there's more like janitorial type stuff. You're not going to go to the National Museum and still find something like that. I doubt it. But that's something I was noticing in other things. And then Chance the Rapper came here to Nairobi recently, and he only focused on the colonialism stuff. Because like different points of view, like I'm saying, for him, that's what his point of view was. For me, that was one of the things that stuck out to me. And also all the cool non-other things, non-colonial stuff. I did focus on some of the colonial, but other things as well. But anyway, so just points of view. So next one was it realistic to expect the truth? So this was the Tulsi Gabbard. She was DNI, Director of National Intelligence. And back in her last day, which was June 20th of 2026, she released all these unclassified documents about them. Now, these are going to be different changes. And this is what she said. Yesterday was my final day. Yesterday was my final day as Director of National Intelligence. I declassified and released never before seen documents exposing the truth about Fauci directing millions of US taxpayer dollars to fund dangerous gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab, working with the intelligence community to suppress the truth about his actions and hide the virus's lab leak origins, and lied to Congress while under oath in 2024. It is time you know the truth. Again, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs was on George Napolitano, and I know with whatever's being released by the DNI is not the full truth, nothing but the truth and the whole truth. No, it's not. There's still people editing and selecting things. There's still people in power right now that have the power to edit and select things that don't want the whole truth out there because it does affect things. Everybody is implicated in this thing. It's not just one person. You can't quarantine this to few people as much as you might want to. It's not just Fauci. Fauci is a symptom. Fauci is a golem of sorts. He's like a Captain Planet sort of character where there's different aspects of the state doing all these different things, and then they come together to form Fauci, and then Fauci is empowered in that kind of way, and he's going out and doing things. And as I mentioned, most people are not political junkies, and the people that are political junkies have more responsibilities in their life, so they can't be going on and finding some of this information that people were researching and finding out about these things long before they were announced, even on these independent sources like Judge Napolitano with someone like Professor Jeffrey Sachs talking about, can Dr. Fauci tell the truth? And even with Tulsi Gabbard releasing that, some people, that's the first time they've heard about these labs. I knew about the labs for some time. I was also following the Ukraine war, Project Ukraine, through people like the Duran Military Submarine Channel, other sources like that have been covering that, hey, those labs are also found there. If you have these things illegal in the United States of America, and some of the stuff is not necessarily illegal, necessarily all in the United States of America, might be done in different ways, but they're not going to stop doing this. They're going to just ship it out to other places. That's how these things work. So I kind of was aware of that, but for some people, this is new. So whatever new people are talking about it, the better. You need to raise awarenesses. But Professor Jeffrey Sachs in this video with Judge Napolitano talked about how he can't do this. This was expected. Like, most of the people are like, okay, we didn't know how he was going to do it. We didn't think he was going to actually answer questions. We may not have thought he was actually going to plead the fifth 111 times, but actually thinking he was going to come out and be like, oh yeah, this was what we actually did. I'm sorry. Like, I know Rand Paul is like saying we just wanted an apology. Come on, dude. He's not going to do that. He's not going to come out and be like, yeah, like, this was something we did and we kind of messed up. And then like after that, this happened. Like, I know I lied to Congress back in 2024 and I said all these things. Like, yeah, I mean, can I get like a pat in the wrist? Or like, even when I get him to jail, like I feel so guilty. He doesn't care about that stuff. He genuinely doesn't care. And that's one thing, like, it's weird to kind of just think that, like, I understand people lying. I understand people who have those personal reasons. But to me, what I was kind of wondering with this, like, are the fraudsters for Fauci worse than Fauci? Because I understand when you're benefiting on certain things. And I understand the people who just had believed in him so much and done certain things in their life that it's dangerous to their psyche, to their id, to their personality, their ego, to admit that they were wrong about some of these things. They'd have to have certain mea culpas that they don't want to take, or they don't want to be like, oh, we damned you. Anyway, so I understand those things. But it's just still weird to me how some people will just genuinely just tell lies and say things that they have no confidence, they have no feeling that this needs to be actually true. This does not need to be a factual statement, but I'm going to state it like it actually is. It's completely optional to say, but people will still say it. And that was a weird thing that happened with this COVID thing. It's like, in some cases, you literally did not have the ability to have certain information about this thing, yet you just clearly like, oh, it's a pangolin. It came from a pangolin. I'm like, how do you know that? I don't, but I know. I'm like, yo, why say those things? Like, that's the weird part to me. Like, Fauci not telling the truth, not coming out and saying things, that's normal to me. But now back to what Rand Paul was saying with the apology. And now with other people, like I said, like, if you were just misguided with things, I already talked about someone Trump. Like, I don't think Trump is the sort of person with his personality who can actually just apologize for certain things. Like, it's just not built into him. But most of y'all aren't like that. Most of y'all don't have so much to risk and gain. And, people are like, okay, Fauci apologized. Yes, Fauci apologized, then what? It's not like Fauci apologized and then you let him off. If Fauci apologized in this case, like, the things he's guilty of have to have jail time. He's an old man. He doesn't want to go to jail. So he's ready to just plead the fifth and rely on the system not actually seeing through these things because of mutually assured destruction. Like, warfare state is going to be exposed. Why was he actually being allowed to fund these things? Either the government and other people were completely incompetent to realize that Fauci was still doing this, or they knew it was going on and were actually co-signing it. There's almost no other way this can exist, and that is both damning to the system, and they're not going to allow. The system is still in power so much that they're not going to allow Fauci to take that L in that kind of way. So Fauci's counting on that. He's pretty confident, and I'm rather confident that's going to be the truth for Fauci. But if you're just like a regular citizen, if you're a private citizen, if you're not tied into the government, or maybe if you're looking to get into the government like this next person, so just think about you in life. If you were on the side where you were like, I don't believe these people, I'm not going to go along, and you were damned by people in your life and around you, how would an apology from these Branch Covidians do to you? Would that affect you? Would that help you? In this next section, we're talking about Stephen A. Smith. He backtracks on Kylie Irving, because Kylie Irving and many other celebrities, athletes, this smaller percentage of them stood up against some of these things and said, we're not doing it for various reasons. Some reasons I may not agree with, but just like having the question that was there, and they were damned, they were berated, they were shamed. There was all these things coming out, and a lot of these people are coming out and vindicated. Like, I'm feeling a bit of vindication because I've had the track record of all the videos on my Dying Alive channel, all these blog posts and ranted on, and we can go back in and actually go on those. I've seen Stefan Molyneux did a thing where he broke down the things that were in the diary, and then he went back in time and said, this was a diary and this date when you were saying this, and this is what I had said at that time. Kind of cool like that. I've seen other people like Dave Smith talking about their experience back then and how he grew, like people come to that. I mentioned the No Agenda show and how that's grown, and people are still coming back and saying, like, when JCD just passed away, a lot of people were coming in and saying, like, yo, you helped me out through such a tough time in my life, and this is sad. Like, I feel like I've lost like a family member and all these kind of things. And there's just many people in different spheres who are like, yo, like, we were kind of right about this, and y'all just pretending like this didn't happen. But some people are actually doing it. And with Stephen A. Smith here, I know his apology for Kyrie comes out because Stephen A. does have some political ambitions. And unlike Fauci, who's ending, and he's like, I don't have this political protection anymore. I'm not going to leave myself at the mercy of the system and be thrown in jail for my last couple of years, so I'm going to just plead the fifth. On the other hand, Stephen A., who has actual genuine political ambitions. And I'm thinking, if there is somebody, a black sports-related person on the Democrat Party that could raise up and actually have potential for actual presidential runs or Senate runs and things like that, I think Stephen A. Smith way over Dwayne Johnson. Although Dwayne Johnson said he's not remembering, The Rock, he's saying he's not talking about his political affiliation. But come on, does anyone actually, I can maybe not say that. Maybe he'll surprise us and be like a strong Republican, conservative sort of person. You never know, but I'm just thinking he just seems like he'd be on the Democratic Party side. Back to the reading as we finish this up. So Stephen A. Smith came out recently and he had a video apologizing to Kyrie Irving and just going over all these different people in the sports world that were maligned, were called evil, they were killing grandma, you're selfish, you're all this, blah, 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 this, blah, 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 that. Why don't you just listen? Why don't you just shut up and dribble? Shut up and throw the football. Shut up and shoot that hoop. Shut up and run. Shut up and do this. And he was like, I was wrong. I actually believe this Fauci guy, and it's wrong. Like, this is absurd that he's coming out and pleading the fifth. Like, he needs to come out and actually say, like, look, I made a mistake. Look, I was wrong with what I did. Look, and he did that. Then Maj Toure, who is someone I really like listening to Maj Toure in part, well, he's more libertarian, and that's closer to how I aligned sociopolitically. And he has something, Black Guns Matter, and he's also a solutionary. So he's the kind of commentator that doesn't just point out that something is wrong, but he highlights the human actions that you can personally take to improve your life. With Black Guns Matter, he talks about how important the First Amendment, which is defended and enforced by the Second Amendment, is in the United States of America. And instead of saying, oh, we need to take away the guns and that kind of gun control, he's in for controlling the guns that you have access to. He goes into urban areas and other places and has classes of responsible gun ownership, how guns can be used responsibly and usefully and in a positive sense. And that is something that I really like about Maj. So he was criticizing Stephen A. Smith and saying, what is this? Just an apology? Are we going to give some restitution to Kyrie? Can we actually give some of the money back that he lost? Can we give some of the contracts that he lost? The people that damned, the friendships and the relationships. I guess some of these things were tested. Some things, they had genuine friendships and they hadn't tested these sorts of topics, and these topics came up and things were broken up because some people genuinely believed the experts, genuinely believed the Faucis, genuinely believed the mainstream media. Some people also genuinely believed Trump and were misled by the things Trump was saying. Some people genuinely were against what Trump was saying, as Democrats are like, oh, this is the Trump vaccine. We don't want to take that. He's rushing this thing. And then all of a sudden, when Biden won, they switched aside. So people were actually believing this. I think most people were not malicious. Stephen A. Smith, as I said, potential chance of him running for president, running for political office. But I do believe it's possible he was also genuinely misled, genuinely misguided. People don't have the time, like I said, to just be turning online and searching up these things like I do. Most people do trust that their states are necessarily for the greater good, even if you have people in control of it. That's why they're like, okay, when Trump is in it, I'm not for this vaccine. But then now when Biden comes in, I believe enough that Biden and his people have put in the right people in there that are trustworthy. Now I'm going to go along, even though this was started under Trump, that kind of sort of thing. Just like on the inverse, how you have certain cases and investigations going in that were started under Biden. And like in that process, okay, we understand that was okay. But now that Trump is controlled, he's continuing those investigations because of the people in there. They've changed the system. They truly believe that. But Maj was saying, okay, we need more than an apology. That's not enough. But then one thing Stephen A. Smith did was spending some of his political capital and having Rand Paul, Dr. Rand Paul. This is another good thing that I think Stephen A. did, was he decided to have him come on and say, Dr. Rand Paul, and point out that other people were also not pointing out this is a doctor. Why are they not mentioning that Rand Paul is actually practicing? So if you want not like the expertise, then why isn't Rand Paul out there? But there was doctors and things like that during the pandemic that were not listened to, that were not accepted. Their expertise isn't correct. So there's other reasons between that. And another thing with the image, if you check it out, it's like Stephen A. Smith on one side with like a blue aura behind him, Rand Paul on the other side of the red aura. Rand Paul is talked about one of the people who could actually run for president. So is Stephen A. Smith also angling, like he's shrewd enough of an activator, ambitious enough of a hustler, that I'm sure he has considered some of these things as he was putting this up. But this is coming to the end of this. And I mean, is an apology enough? When Rand Paul says, I just want an apology from Fauci, that's enough. I don't know. I think it's good just to have the awareness out there. You know, there is a positive of having awareness, but I just don't know. Like, you're not Anthony Fauci. You're not the mainstream media. You're not those kind of people who profited a whole crap ton about power or money or status, all these other things during the pandemic from following what was being said by the mainstream media, by the approved narrative. So if you in your life had wronged somebody, had told somebody to do something in a different way, you can just apologize. And I think that would go a way to mend bridges. You're not Trump, who just has the sort of personality where even admitting to apology seems to be some kind of slight that he's not able to actually bear. I don't think you have to be that way in your personal life. You're not Dr. Fauci again. You're not the people who were defending this system that existed where the welfare and the warfare state came together. This need to have biological warfare studies and then the ability to sequester the money away and then have this outside of the law and not have oversight, where you can have this in different places. You can have this openly talked about within the people inside, having enough confidence to run these kind of schemes and plans and plots and put them out there. And just, why write this stuff down? But then if it's like, why write this stuff? Why do it? Because why not write this stuff down? Who's going to hold him accountable? Is the state going away anytime soon? Are the people who were invested who helped him do this? Because it's not a situation where the state was so incompetent they didn't know this was going on. Do people genuinely believe that? Like, people just didn't know this was going on? No, people knew. People with power knew. People with influence knew. People who still have power and influence in the current state under Trump and other countries all over the world knew. They supported this. They wanted this to go on. I don't think this leak was intentional to go out, in spite of my conspiracy theories. I'm going to have a lot of other things to say there. But they are invested in the system as is. And why I'm saying raising the awareness is good enough is because this is just more evidence. You don't need to convert 50% plus one in order to have some significant change in the zeitgeist and people to understand we need something better. It's not the people in control of the system. It's the system itself. There was ways of governing, ways of controlling society, ways of organizing, ways of hierarchies, ways of advancing humanity before states existed. Despite states existing, we have continued to flourish. We have continued to increase the quality of life for humanity. And in order to achieve new levels of it, we need these sorts of people and projects and places to be exposed. That how does this exist without the state? And I don't think it does. And the more we have things like this, the easier it is to make that argument and just say, there's more we can do. We can benefit and profit from moving on from the state and finding what's coming next. So that's it for me. And as you've seen on the screen, some people think he's positive. Some people think he's negative. Some people think he's an angel. Some people think he's a demon. I think he's a human being that was put forward, was given access to this tool, and he used it in this horrific way that, if you really think about it, as I might have said before, was this actually more damaging? This is more towards welfare state. I know that in the research is going on with military implications of the warfare state, but it's easy to see places getting bombed out and dilapidated, count the numbers of the people dead from bombs and all those kind of things. in the warfare state and say this is horribly destructive. But this is welfare state destruction. The lives that were affected, the people that died, the people that were affected by this, the economical changes that were happening, this, the trauma that was put into people, the relationships that were broken up by this. Is this as significant, this 5-year span, as significant as the last 75 years post-World War II involvement of the United States of America in different wars all over the world? I don't know, but it was the first global event in that kind of sense. Okay, so I'm going to profit a bit from this too, because you can go and see on the screen there's merchandise. You can go buy the positive voucher or the negative voucher. I don't know what I'm going to put in the titles of this, but links to my Redbubble store will be there that you can check that out. And yeah, for now, I just don't have what else to say. Where were you on this thing? Did you go along with things? Did you pressure people into things? Do you regret what you did in the past? Why did you do those things? Am I wrong? Am I helping kill grandmother next time by undermining the science that this Fauci stands for? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Also, did you think Fauci was actually going to see any recourse? Did you think this was actually going to lead to him being in jail? Because I kind of feel a bit of pity for you if you thought this was what was going to happen in this hearing. So that's it for me. Like, share, subscribe. Guys, gals, and everybody else in between, goodbye.